Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today is our third lecture of subject Global Business Management, and this lecture is about international business environment, and specifically we are focusing on culture. This is the continuation of the lecture number 2. Today's the learning objectives are to understand the effect of culture on international business, to get familiar with the importance of values and attitudes for global business. The third objective is to know the sources of knowledge, and the fourth one is to analyze the culture, and in the last learning objective we are going to see to understand the training challenges. Before we start our lecture, we quickly do the recap of the last lecture, where we discussed the 4 different types of business orientations. In the first orientation, we did see that firm is mostly focused on domestic market, despite they have entered in the foreign market. Even then, their focus is on the domestic market. And in the second orientation, the firms are doing operation both in domestic and foreign market, but their focus is they are treating foreign market separately. In other terms, we can say their strategy is localized strategy. In third orientation, firm is consider markets in terms of regions, meaning they make their strategies on the basis of regions. They divide the markets on the basis of region. And in the last one, the firms treat the entire globe as one market, and their strategy is considered as single strategy across the globe. If we see when we proceeded to the next one, next topic that we discussed in the last lecture was the globalization stages, and we have seen there are purely domestic firms which are only operational in the domestic market, and subsequently the firm, when they intend to do some multinational activity, they start with the small activities like export or import or licensing. Subsequently, when they intend to expand their foreign activity, they expand to the another markets and they become the international company. When they become further expand that foreign market activity, they become multinational firms, and subsequently they become a transnational firm when their operation expand to all over the continents. After that, we have discussed the drivers of global business. In drivers of global business, we have seen the first one as the liberalization. Liberalization is considered as a main important driver for the international business. In liberalization, we have seen the privatization, liberalization, and restructuring of the market. These are the 3 elements we have seen. And in liberalization, these terms or this aspect or this driver is more pertinent to the developing or emerging economies. Technology. Because of technology, we have seen that the distance has decreased. In other words, different distance has been omitted within the foreign transactions. And the second thing is the technology has no boundaries. If technology is introduced in one market, automatically with the passage of time or with the immediate effect, that technology transfer to another markets. That means there are no boundaries for the technology. The third one is multinational corporations. Because of the entrance across the globe of these multinational corporations, domestic firms are forced to go out from the foreign market to from the domestic markets to international markets. Another driver that we had discussed was World Wide Web, the internet, because of the advent of this internet facilities, we have seen that the business-to-business deals and business-to-consumer deals have been significantly improved. And the next one is the product development cost. Because of the technology, the cost of production has been reduced. And the next point that we discussed is the competition. Like we said, because of multinational corporations, the level of competition has been increased within all over the globe, and because of this element, the firms or level of internationalization has been increased. The next factor was regional integration. In regional integration, we have seen that countries have made several agreements or pact to enhance their level of trade between these countries, and in order to do so, they have made some pacts within the region on the basis of regional unity. And we have seen this thing like SAARC, BRIC economies, NAFTA. These are the different agreements between the Asian countries, between the North American countries, and because of these regional integration, the level of international business have been substantially increased. The next factor was leverage. Leverage means advantages that firms acquire by experience of international business. These experiences are experienced through transfer, economy of scale when they are producing at a larger scale, and of course the cost of production reduced, and resource utilization. They learn from the foreign activities how to optimally utilize the resources. These resources can be the financial resources and human capital resources. Global strategy, they make new strategy on the basis of new environment elements, and these of course, like they develop the strategy in the domestic market, they have to scan the environment, and similarly they have to scan the environment, foreign environment, international markets environment, to formalize the global strategy. The next topic that we had discussed was the restraining forces. Restraining forces mean those forces which restrict firm from international activity. These can be classified as external restraining forces, external forces, and internal forces. External forces are those forces which rest in the external environment, like unavailability of basic facilities to operate the business, or infrastructure, or power, or rule of law. These are the things that corporate level of corporate governance, bureaucratic obstacles. These are the external forces, and internal forces are capability of firms' internal capability resources, like unavailability of the financial resources. They don't have sufficient financial capital to move out from the domestic to foreign market, and these can be the human capital resources. People or their management is not so well equipped with the knowledge of international market. These can be the restraining forces. And next topic that we had discussed was international business decision making. When a firm has to decide to move from domestic to foreign market, they have to make a decision. In that decision making, there are 4 different steps involved. The first one is the firm has to see or scan the environment, see objectives, resources, internal resources, market potential of foreign market, and environmental factors of domestic market and foreign market. These are the different factors that firm has to consider when they initially, in the first step, when they decide whether they have to go in the foreign market or not. Once they decide that they can enter in the foreign market, then they have to, in the second step, they have to select a market, appropriate market where they can start their business. In the third step, then they have to decide the entry mode, how they are going to enter in the new market. These entry modes can be from the smaller scale, that can be import or export, or licensing, or franchise, or At the larger scale, they can choose a mode of FDI, foreign direct investment, merger and acquisition, or joint ventures. These are the different modes that firm can opt. But it again depends on the financial resources, commitment, and different risk factors associated with each and every mode, and firm has to decide and consider all those factors, then decide about that entry mode. The next factor was international structure decision. Once the firm is entered in the foreign market, then they have to reorganize their organizational structure. Either they can, like we have seen the orientation, either they can follow the same domestic market structure or strategy in the foreign market, or they have to think about reorganizing the organizational structure. The next point that we had discussed was the business environment. Business has to face domestic environment, international environment, and global environment. In domestic environment, like where firm is facing is operating, the factors, all the factors, environmental factors are the domestic environment factor. International, where firm is going to operate, that is considered as an international environment. And the third one is the global environment. Global environment means the rules or guidelines set by the WTO, World Trade Organization, or treaties between the countries or across the regions. These are the different things which are the procedural rules which decide or which set the environment, the global environment. The next point that we had discussed was the self-reliance criteria. Self-reliance criteria means that when firms are, specifically we say that when the management go abroad, even in the foreign market, when they have to make the decisions, they make their foreign market decision on the basis of values, attitude, or perceptions of home market. They have to stop doing this. How they can stop doing this thing? They can do that in such a way that first of all they have to identify the problem and possible solution, and the second thing is and they have to identify the problem. They can take that problem and objective and solution in domestic market and international market, and in the third step they can compare the outcomes from the first and second step, and distinguish between what sort of elements, what sort of steps they can take explicitly for the foreign market. The last topic that we had discussed was the culture. Culture is basically integrated system of learned behavior patterns that characterizes of the members of any given society. There are two types of culture: high context culture and low context culture. In high context culture, context is more influenced on the culture, like in Saudi Arabia or Iran or Japan. And low context culture, where context is less influenced on the culture, like in USA or Europe. In the last topic, we had discussed the various elements of the culture. We had discussed in the last lecture 3 elements: the language, religion, manners, and customs. Language, verbal and non-verbal, we have to see the both elements of the language. Religion, we have seen how religion impacts on the business activities. These activities can be the diversity within the environment, availability of human resources, negotiations, some formal agreements. These are the different things that we have, or product selection or marketing way. These are the different things that they have to a firm has to consider, and these factors belong to the religion of that particular country. The last element that we have seen, that manners and customs. Manner and customs are also very important in the foreign market. Managers have to understand the manner and custom of the new market and then act accordingly. Next, we had discussed a mini case study of Nestle. And we had discussed that Nestle, the largest food company which has the headquarters in Switzerland, but its products can be found all over the world. Unlike the common way to make different websites for different markets. By simply having an extension of Swiss market, Nestle developed different websites for each country like US, UK and Japan, Philippines. Our questions that we had to think about was 3 questions. The first one, by not having the extension of websites like other firms do, they are in fact rejecting the basic assumption internet culture overcome any differences of national culture. What you have thought about that? The possible solution of this question, or I would say you could think this question in these dimensions, that this is the traditional approach as opposed to cookie cutter approach, which is the cookie cutter approach is when the firms make the extension of the parent website. Rather than cookie cutter approach to market itself even in unconventional business format. They are trying to differentiate from the other firms by having a separate website for each country. Despite the second question that you had to think about was, despite having similar product, why Nestle have different websites for each market? Because they are giving more importance to the cultural differences. That was the more important reasons. That's why they are having the different websites. The third question was, it was a practical activity that you had to perform, was visit these websites of Nestle of different countries and identify how Nestle responds to the cultural differences. Okay, now we start with this thing, cultural values and attitudes. And cultural values and attitudes, we start with this way, that values are shared beliefs or group norms within the society, and attitudes are the evaluation of alternatives based on values. And how these values and attitude affect on business steps or business processes, we can say that these values and attitudes affect on business planning, business decision making, strategy implementation and evaluation. Explicitly, Japanese and Chinese values are different from the world. If we see that Japanese, the big invisible wall for the foreigners is in the Japanese market is their values and attitude and culture. These are the largest wall in Japanese market for foreigners. Middle-aged managers in Japan, they are even considering in this way that if they buy foreign products, they consider that it is an unpatriotic thing to do. When they buy the foreign products, they prefer to buy the local products. In China, the managers believe that one should build relationship first, and then they have to make some business decisions or some agreement between the companies. And in China, they are more focused. Their managers, they are more focusing on the building informal relationships, which are called as guangxi. Before final decisions or before making any negotiation, they more emphasize to develop relationship between each other. Managers must not assume that success in one market is necessarily is also a success in other market. We can take the example of Disneyland. Disneyland was very successful idea when they started business, when they moved out from the American market to the Japan, because Japanese people, Japanese culture were really fond of American culture. That concept went really good. But subsequently, when they moved to Paris, to France, that concept, the people of France, they didn't buy that concept very quickly. They faced really troubles because of cultural differences, because French people are more strict with their own cultural values. And that's mean that it shows that just extending one project to one country to another doesn't mean the success will be there for the company. Okay, here we can see the different examples of values of US culture, and what can be the alternative values and the management function affected, how the management functions are affected from these values. The first one we can see that individual can, this is the first value, the individual can influence the future. Where there is a will, there is a way. But the alternative value for this US belief is the alternative value can be found in other countries, like people who have different cultures or values, like life follows a predefined course and human action is determined by the will of God. In more people, the societies which are more influenced by the religion, they have definitely this sort of values. And what sort of business activity is influenced because of such values? It's a planning and scheduling. The next value, US value, is we must work hard to accomplish our objectives. On the alternative hand, the people believe hard work is not the only prerequisite for success. Wisdom, luck, and time are also required. These alternative values are the US value. These basically they affect on the motivation and reward system within the company. The third one is commitment should be honored. That's the one value. And the alternative value is a commitment may be superseded by the conflicting request. They have to compare this commitment with the other alternative options. This is the one value, the alternative value, and it affects on the negotiation and bargaining. One should the US value is one should effectively use one time. They have to follow the time and they effectively use this time. And on the other alternative value is schedules are important, but only in context of other priorities, in relation to other priorities, and how it affects on the business, long-term and short-term plannings. If we proceed, a primary obligation of an employee is to the organization. Alternative value is the individual employees has a primary obligation to his family and friends. That's the alternative value, and it affects on the loyalty, commitment, and motivation of that employee towards the business. The next US value is the best qualified person should be given the positions available. And the other alternative value is family considerations, friendship, and other considerations should determine the employment practices. And it affects on the employment, promotions, restructuring, selection, and reward. The next US value is intuitive aspects of decision making should be reduced, and efforts should be developed to gathering relevant information, action. On the alternative, they are saying decisions are expressions of wisdom. By questioning would imply a lack of confidence in his judgment. And how it affects on the business, it affects through the decision making process. Data should be accurate. This is the one US value, and alternative value is accurate data are not as highly valued, and if it affects on the record keeping. Company information should be available to anyone who needs it within the organization. And the other hand, they are saying withholding the information to gain or maintain power is acceptable. They can keep the data with themselves or information private to keep the control, and it affects on organization commitments and managerial styles. Each person is expected to have an opinion and to express it freely, even if his views do not agree with his colleagues. This is a US value. And the other hand, deference is given to the person in power or authority, and to offer judgment that is not in support of the ideas of one's superior is unthinkable. Respect should be given on the basis of the seniority, and it affects on the communication and the organizational relationship within the employees. The next value is a person is expected to do whatever is necessary to get the job done. One must be willing to get one's hand dirty. That's the basic US value. And the other hand, alternative value is various kinds of works are accorded low or high status, and some work may be below one's dignity or place in the organization. And it affects an organization by assignment of tasks, performance, and organizational effectiveness. The last US value which is given here is change is considered an improvement and dynamic reality. And on the other hand, they are saying tradition is revered and the power of the ruling group is founded on the continuation of a stable structure. And how it affects on the organization? It affects through planning, morale, and organizational development. Okay, the next thing that they're discussing is culture. Within culture, their point is material element. Material element refers to the impact of technology, and as a result, its material element is the society is a result of a society organizes its activity. It can take three form: economic infrastructure, social infrastructure, and financial infrastructure. Economic infrastructure mean the basic infrastructure for the communication, for transportation, and social infrastructure mean health, availability of health, and availability of education. Financial infrastructure mean availability of financial resources, financial institutions, banks, and research institutes. Some firms have to, when they go to the international market, they have to build these infrastructure by themselves in order to perform their international activities. On the other hand, some countries, some markets already have this sort of facilities, this sort of infrastructure, and they utilize those already available infrastructures. Okay, important thing is IT has been the major cause of that change. IT has made a significant change within these infrastructure, and important thing is cultural convergence. Cultural convergence means the difference between the different cultures across the world is reducing. That means that the culture is gradual, because again it all goes to that advent of the information technology. Because of information technology, the cultural differences across the countries are reducing. We can say that in terms of material elements, we can take the example of if we go back and see that when USA invented black and white television, it introduced in EU market after 10 years. That means the time lag for that material was 10 years between these two markets. After that, when they introduced the colored television in the US market, the lag reduced to 5 years. Mean after 5 years, Europe got the color TV as well. Subsequently, when we see that for video recording, VCR or VCP, the difference between two countries, between two markets, reduced to 3 years. And after this, when we come to the CD, compact disc, the difference between the introduction of CD in US and EU market reduced to only 1 year. And when we when we talk about the internet, it's internet introduced in these two markets on the same time. That's the important thing, that the differences in terms of material elements is reducing gradually across the markets. The next point is of culture is aesthetics and education. These are the two different points. The first point for the aesthetic, each color has clear statement for what is acceptable. Each culture has clear statement for what is acceptable and what is not. For instance, we can take the example of nudity. In some societies, to a certain extent of nudity is acceptable. On the other hand, in certain societies, nudity at any level is not acceptable. Color in some countries, in some cultures, some markets, color, black color symbolizes of grievance, and on the other hand, in Far East countries or Japan, the white color symbolizes of grievance. About education, there are two types of education: formal education and informal education. Both plays an important role in passing on and sharing of culture. Formal education you can get from the R&D, from the secondary data, and informal secondary data mean this sort of available databases, this media, print or electronic media, and already available research. And informal education mean that you have to learn yourself by involving into that culture. Education level also affect the international business. How it affects on the human capital, marketing. Like human capital, like it's very famous that when the firms have to go to the Japan or South Korea, they have more engineering people available there in those markets compared to the other disciplines. And similarly, when they go to the Chinese market, they have difficulty in recruiting the people who can speak English. In marketing, company can choose, if the education level is high, they can more rely on the visual aid rather than using more manuals. The next point is social institutions. Social institutions affect the way people relate to each other. Social institution is the basically family unit. In certain cultures, social institution or family unit comprised of parents and children, and certain cultures, family unit comprised of parents, children, and their grandparents and their relatives. And this affect this family unit or size or these social institutions affect on the organizational culture, and this mean they determine the national culture, which ultimately affects on the organizational culture. Second thing is, these family unit, the size of family unit also determine the consumption level, buying needs, and for organization it also affects for the availability of human capital. In some countries, decision when they are living on the individual basis or collectivistic behavior, collectivistic way, mean these two difference in these two different orientations determine the decision making power of individual person within the society. Okay, important thing is, the last point is, organizational culture and national culture should be aligned. Here they quote the example of if when the firm has to enter in the foreign market, they have to understand the national culture. And if the national culture is based on the class system, then the firm has to follow the same class system within the organization. They can do that, but in certain firms, in certain markets, not possible. Like in Nestle, they are following. They have the same parking areas for executives and non-executive people or white-collar people. They have same sitting places and same dining places for the non-executive people and the white-collar people. But on the other hand, if we see where they are more class system, then the firm has to follow the similar cultural values. Okay, sources of cultural knowledge. There are two types of knowledge. One is objective or factual. The second one is experimental. The first one is learned through the communication, education, and R&D. And the experimental knowledge is learned by involving oneself in new culture. One can see that objective is the example of impact of GDP, regional integration, and on the country specific, if we go to the country level, tariff barriers, governmental regulation for the particular industry for our particular firm. On the second type of knowledge is experimental. The examples are corporate adjustment to new market, and examples, country level example are product acceptance within the new market, program appropriateness, to what extent that program is appropriate in the new market. This is one survey provided in the book of Chizenkota, page 49, and this is the survey which across the managers, and they were asked about how they are going to rank these 8 different sources of education. And as you can see that the first one on the top is the business travel, and 68.8% people think this is the most critical way to learn the knowledge, to learn the education. And the second one is assignments overseas, and the third one is reading or television. The fourth one is training programs, and the fifth one is pre-career activities like previous experience in the government or other organizations. The sixth one is the graduate courses, seventh one is non-business travel, and the last one is undergraduate courses. I mean, all these different sources provide that these are different levels, but on the top, the business travel and assignment overseas, where the practically managers involve into the new culture and learn that culture. Good companies provide their managers opportunity to learn that culture. For example, Nestle, before doing the short-term transfer, they always they rotate those people, those managers. After each 4 to 5 years, they assigned and they are transferred to the new market within America, within all over the globe. Okay, next topic is cultural analysis. Culture lifestyles can be classified into 4 dimensions. Individualism, second one is power distance, third one is uncertainty avoidance, and the fourth one is masculinity. Individualism means to what extent people within the society rely on themselves. The opposite of this individualism is collectivism. Do they make decisions on the individual basis, or they have to make decisions on the collectivist basis? This is the first cultural dimension. The next one is power distance. Power distance means we can say the class system, the distance between the classes, the people within the society. The third one is uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance means to what extent from the people within the culture are avoiding the risk. This is the most important thing. The fourth one is masculinity. Masculinity means the segregation between the genders. To what extent the people are cultures have assigned different roles for different genders. Okay, on the basis of 4 those dimensions, this is one diagram which classify the different 12 countries on the basis of 4 dimensions, and this is the range of those dimensions ranges from 0 to 100. As on our left hand side, we can see that it starts from 0 to 100, and uncertainty avoidance, we can see that uncertainty avoidance means risk, avoiding risk. So the important thing is why people within the culture avoid risk. Most important element is the determining factor is because of unavailability of rule of law. People avoid risk because if they get into some trouble, how they are going to get the justice. And like in developing countries, people in developing countries, they try to avoid the risk, because people or the firms, they are trying to avoid the risk because if they don't want to involve themselves in the legal proceedings. Like we start from the top, Japan, uncertainty avoidance is almost maximum. This is maximum. France, Mexico, and in the top, in the bottom, we see that there is West Africa, Indonesia, Hong Kong. On the right hand side, there is individualism. If we see that in the right hand side, the top of that
is USA, where we can say we interpret this finding is in USA or in Netherlands or Great Britain. It's written like the top 3 countries are these 3 countries on the scale of 0 to 100. These countries are purely based on individualistic societies. And in the bottom, the extreme bottom, there is Indonesia and West Africa and Hong Kong. These countries are least individualistic countries, meaning they are more based on the collectivist societies. Okay, and the next thing that they have done is they have made the clusters of these countries on the basis of these 4 elements: power, distance, uncertainty, avoidance, individualism, and masculinity. The first cluster is Austria, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Great Britain, and Ireland. And we see that power distance of this cluster 1 is small, uncertainty avoidance is medium, individualism level is medium or high, and masculinity is high. The next one is cluster 2, Belgium, France, Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Turkey. Power distance is medium, uncertainty avoidance is strong, individualism is varied across the countries, masculinity is low to medium. Power distance mean the class system, and individualism in to what extent they are depends on the within the family collectivistic terms and conditions. And the last cluster is cluster number 3, the Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, and Norway. The power distance, the class system is the minimum, small, uncertainty avoidance is low, mean they don't avoid the uncertainty, they can take the risk because they have a strong rule of law. Individualism, that's high, they don't have the collectivist societies. Masculinity is low, mean segregated roles are not permitted in those countries. What's the implication of these 4 elements for the business? The first one is the performance for high performance products, use successful achievers, and the next one is appeal to customer status and power positioning, reduce perceived risk in product purchase and use, emphasize product functionality, and for the third cluster, a relatively weak resistance to new products, strong consumer desire for novelty and variety, high consumer regard for environmentally friendly marketers, and socially conscious firms. Okay, the next topic that we are going to discuss is training challenges. What are the different challenges a firm has to face when they are providing training to their employees to learn the new culture? The basic objective of formal training program is to foster 4 critical characteristics. The first one is preparedness, sensitivity. The second one is sensitivity. The third one is patience, and the fourth one is flexibility. Preparedness means those because of this training and with the help of that training, firms should be able to, and they should be prepared to face the new environment, new situation that they have to encounter in the foreign market. Sensitivity that they have to understand the sensitivity of the new market. Sensitivity issues mean like the religious elements within the Gulf countries, or religious elements within the Iran, or caste system, or we can say that the religious or some ethnic some issues within India. These are the sensitive issues that firm has to consider. And the next one is the patience. Firm has to learn how within the negotiation firm has to learn the patience. The next one is a flexibility. Flexibility is functional within the foreign market in terms of negotiation and when firms are making new agreement within the foreign marketers. Okay, it helps managers in negotiation, formalizing contracts, and management. These are the three main important domains where these trainings directly affects within the management. Okay, and this is the different sort of trainings that a firm provides to their employees. The first one is area briefing. If we say that it goes from low to high, and on the right hand side, on the vertical, on the horizontal level, we can see that it's verbal, symbolic observations, and on the horizontal line, they are more presenting the focus of those training, and on the vertical line, the training rigor, the focus of the training concentration. If we see this thing that in the start, area briefing starts with the area briefing. The program provides the factual preparation for a manager to operate in working environment with new cultures. This is basically the prerequisite for other programs. It includes the area briefing, lectures, books, factuals, films. These are the different things which include the different facts and figure, and which provides the introductory information about the new country. And all these things are the basics for advanced training. After this, we see that cultural assimilator. Cultural assimilator is the too specific. It's cultural specific and the task specific. For instance, it is more applicable in the Arab countries, in Gulf countries, or Iran, or Central American countries. It is used for the it is used specifically when a firm intends to transfer their manager for the short period of time. Before that transfer, before they travel to that market, they provide them the cultural assimilators to assimilate within new culture. The next one is the sensitivity training, which enhance managers' flexibility in situations different from the home country. This is the main point. And when we see this thing that the interactive language, after this thing there are some trainings which more focus on the language training. When the firm has more time, firm and the management have the more time, they provide such training to the manager to learn that language. If we see on the top of their level, at the extreme top, there's a field experience. Exposed to managers to a new different cultures for a limited period of time. In this training, in fact, what company is doing is they are sending their managers for a short period of time to that market just as an observer, and to learn that culture. This culture, though this training is very expensive for the company, that's why they don't do it very often. But in order to provide that sort of experience, they are providing them the simulations or field trips, or these are the two main ways through which they compensate the field experience. Okay, now the critical thinking question of this chapter is, what you have to do is you have to choose two countries where religion has a strong influence, and then compare the cultures of those countries and indicate how culture differences influence the business practices and the cost of doing business in each country. What you're going to do is you have to think such two countries where the culture is more important, or we can say that where religion is the main, some religion is the dominating religion of that country, and the practices, the values, attitudes, and overall the culture is influence because of that religion. And first of all, you have to identify those countries, 2 countries, and then you are going to pick one firm and see how that firm operate in those 2 different countries, how their business practices are different in these 2 countries because of that culture or because of that religion, and what sort of cost they are incurring because of differences in their business practices. This is the critical question that you have to think, and we are going to discuss this question, the answer of this question, in the next lecture. Okay, before we finish today's lecture, we are going to wind up today's what we have done today. Is the first topic that we had discussed today is a quick summary. The first topic that we had discussed today is the values, which is the third part of the culture. Values are shared beliefs or group norms within the society, and attitudes are evaluations of alternatives based on those values. This is the basic thing of values. The next point was material element. It refers to the impact of technology and as a result of how society organizes its activities. The basic element of material elements are economic infrastructure, social infrastructure, and financial infrastructure. Economic infrastructure mean that how the communication channels or infrastructures are developed within the countries, and the social infrastructure mean how education and healthcare facilities are available within the market. The next one is financial infrastructure, mean availability of financial resources like in financial institutions, bank, R&D sources, how these things are available within the market. Some firms, when they go out, they use the already existing these basic infrastructures, materials already available there, and some companies have to build by themselves in order to operate there. We can see this thing if we divide this concept to within the developed and developing economies. We can say that when firms are going from developing to developed economies, the infrastructure, difference or economic infrastructure and social infrastructure, these infrastructure are already available there, and firms are utilizing the already available infrastructures. On the other hand, when firms go to the developing economies, and particularly least developing economies like Africa or Afghanistan, in those economies, firms have to develop these infrastructure by themselves in order to perform their international business activities. The next point was the cultural convergence. Cultural convergence means the difference between the cultures across the countries are reducing, are converging with each other. And the best example that we had quoted was like this, that the difference between the launching of black and white TV in USA and Europe was 10 years, the time lag was 10 years, and subsequently when the color TV was invented in USA, after 5 years, that color TV was brought to Europe as well. And so after that, the difference between those material elements was reduced to 3 years when we talk about the video recording instruments. And when it comes to the CD, the time lag reduced to 1 year. And for the internet, the time lag was 0. Mean internet was introduced in Europe and USA, the time was almost the same. Mean because of these things, the culture is converging with each other. The next point that we had seen, that each culture has clear statement for what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. In some countries, on the basis of, if we talk about the nudity, in some cultures it's partial nudity is acceptable, in some it's not acceptable at all. We had talked about the colors, the significance, the symbolic meanings of colors. In some countries, the color of black color symbolizes the grievance. In countries like Europe or USA, while white color symbolizes the same thing in Indonesia, in Japan. The next point that we had discussed was education. Education plays an important role in passing on and sharing the culture. There are two types of knowledge education: objective or factual, which comes through the communication, education, and R&D. The next one is experimental. Experimental knowledge is obtained by involving oneself in the new culture. Okay, the last point that we had discussed, that cultural lifestyles can be classified into 4 dimensions: individualism, power distance, uncertainty avoidance, and masculinity. Individualism means to what extent that culture or that society is can make decision by themselves. They are not depending on the other people. The opposite of individualism is collectivism. And the next point is power distance. Power distance means the class system. To what extent that society has the difference between the people, between the classes of the people. And then the uncertainty avoidance, avoidance of risk. This is the main important thing. People within the culture, people do that. People avoid that risk because of avoiding the litigations. And if we classify, and masculinity mean gender segregated roles. Women and men were assigned different roles. If we see that in terms of these 4 points, in terms of developing and developed countries, we can say that individualism is more commonly seen in the developing and developed countries, and collectivism is mostly visible across the developing countries. Power distance, class, that means the class system. Class system, the typical example of class system is India, where the class is the people, the whole society is subdivided between the different classes. And if we see the opposite of that country, on the other extreme is the Scandinavian countries. In Norway, Sweden, Finland, the class system is, the power distance is minimal. The uncertainty avoidance, we see that in again the Scandinavia or Japan, people are less, they take more risk, and in developing countries, people avoid there is a culture to avoid the risk. And the last topic, the last point of this culture dimension is masculinity. Masculinity means in developing countries there is more segregated roles for women and men. On the other hand, there is no separate distinction between the roles of men and women within developed countries. These were the main things that we had discussed today. In the next lecture, we are going to continue with the next topic, and we are going to talk about the international trade, and we are going to talk about how the different trade restrictions, trade barriers, or tariffs or non-tariffs impact from where they started, and what are the different organizations which controls these different regulations or procedure within the international business across the globe. Of course, we need certain rules and regulation to conduct this global business. And subsequently, we are going to discuss that what are the impacts of these trade and tariffs across developing and developed countries. These are the topics we are going to discuss in the next lecture, and I really advise you guys to have a look on the chapter number 3 of Chizenkota to see that these are the first 4 topics of that chapter. Before the next lecture, lecture number 4, you have to see those topics. Thank you very much for today. Okay, Allah Hafiz.